He sold my house while I was in the hospital. Not his house. Mine. The one I paid for with 31 years of teaching. 6th grade and summers, spent not taking vacations so I could keep the mortgage current. He put it on the market on a Tuesday, accepted an offer by Thursday, and by the time I was discharged on Saturday morning, there was already a lockbox on the front door. He didn't call me. Neither did my daughter. I found out from my neighbor Dolores, who saw the listing on Zillow and texted me a screenshot with 3 question marks and a red flag emoji. I was still in my hospital gown when I read it, sitting on the edge of the bed, waiting for the nurse to bring my discharge papers. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I read Dolores's message twice, set the phone face down on the blanket beside me, and looked at the window for a long time. Then I asked the nurse if I could have a glass of water, please. My name is Margaret. I am 67 years old. I taught middle school English for 3 decades in Raleigh, North Carolina, retired 4 years ago with a modest pension and a house I'd paid off completely, and a small lake cottage in Hendersonville that I inherited from my mother. That cottage was the only thing I had left of her. She used to make biscuits there on Sunday mornings and let me sleep in until 10 o'clock, which she never allowed at home. Every room in that cottage smelled like her somehow, even 20 years after she passed. Pine and something sweet, coffee and old wood. My daughter Sarah is 41. She was always the easier of my 2 children. Steady, practical. When she married Derek 8 years ago, I was genuinely happy for her. He was charming in the way that men are when they want something. Confident handshake, good teeth, the kind of laugh that fills a room whether you want it to or not. I noticed things over the years, small things. The way he talked over Sarah at dinner, the way he called me Marge even after I asked him twice not to, how he referred to my pension as that little check you get without irony, how, when I visited their home, he would find reasons to leave the room whenever Sarah and I talked, and Sarah would grow quieter with each passing hour until I was essentially having a conversation with a woman who'd learned to take up less space. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself Sarah was a grown woman. I told myself a lot of things that let me keep the peace. Then my hip gave out. It wasn't dramatic. I was walking to the mailbox in January, hit a patch of ice I didn't see, and went down hard. Surgery the next morning. The surgeon said it went well, but that I'd need several weeks of recovery, ideally with someone nearby. Sarah drove up the day after surgery, which meant Derek came too, which meant they stayed at the cottage because it was 40 minutes from the hospital, and they said it made more sense than a hotel. I said that was fine. I said thank you. I meant both things. Derek had been between jobs for about 7 months at that point. He'd left his position at a commercial real estate firm, or the firm had asked him to leave. The story changed depending on when you asked, and had been doing what he called consulting in the meantime, which, as far as I could tell, meant driving a nice truck and having lunch. Sarah was carrying them both on her salary from the school district, where she worked as a reading specialist. She never complained about it. That was the thing about Sarah. She never complained about anything. And somehow, that was the thing that worried me most. I was in the hospital for 11 days. The surgery was routine, but my blood pressure did something unexpected on day 4, and they kept me longer to monitor it. Sarah visited every afternoon. Derek came twice that I saw, both times for less than 20 minutes, both times checking his phone throughout. He brought me a gas station bouquet on the second visit. The flowers were already wilting. On the morning of day 9, Derek asked to speak with me alone. Sarah had stepped out to get coffee. He sat down in the chair beside my bed, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and gave me the smile he used when he wanted something. He said he'd been thinking about the cottage. He said the lake property market in that area was strong right now. He said a place like mine, with the water frontage and the original stonework, could go for significantly more than I probably realized. He said he had contacts in residential real estate. He said if I ever thought about liquidating, he could make sure I got top dollar and save myself the commission. I listened to all of it. Then I said I appreciated him sharing that and that I wasn't thinking about selling. He nodded, like I'd said something he expected. He said, of course, just something to keep in mind. Sarah came back with the coffee. The conversation ended. I thought about it afterward. I thought about it the way you think about something when a part of your brain files it away without telling the rest of you why. I didn't say anything to Sarah. I didn't say anything to anyone. On the morning of the 11th day, Dolores sent me the screenshot. The listing was professional. Derek had clearly used someone he knew. The photos were well lit. The description was polished. Charming lakeside retreat, fully renovated, original stone fireplace, private dock. The asking price was listed. It was a good price. He wasn't wrong about the market. My name was nowhere in the listing. I asked the nurse for that glass of water. I got dressed. I signed my discharge papers. On the drive home, a woman from the hospital's patient transport program drove me, because neither Sarah nor Derek had answered their phones that morning. I looked out the window at the bare January trees and thought about my mother's biscuits, the way she pressed the dough with the heel of her hand, not the knuckles. She said most people use too much pressure, and that's why biscuits came out tough. The transport woman was kind. She asked if I had someone at home waiting for me. I said yes, my daughter, which was technically still true. When we pulled up to the cottage, there was a realtor's lockbox on the front door and a yard sign in the frozen ground. My daughter's car was in the driveway. I thanked the transport woman. I took my walker from the back seat. I made my way up the path one careful step at a time, because the last time I rushed, I ended up in surgery. Sarah opened the door before I reached it. She looked the way a person looks when they've been waiting to say something terrible and have now run out of time. She looked like she hadn't slept. She was still in yesterday's clothes. Derek was in the kitchen. I could hear him on the phone. Sarah said my name. She said she was sorry. She said Derek had explained that the listing was just to test the market, that nothing was finalized, that we could talk about it. I said I'd like to sit down. She helped me to the living room couch, my mother's couch, which still had the same slipcover from 1987, because I could never find a reason to change it. I sat down. I folded my hands in my lap. Derek came in from the kitchen. He spread his hands in front of him, palms out, the gesture men make when they want to look reasonable. He said the listing was just exploratory. He said he'd used a friend as the listing agent, so there was no commitment. He said the offer that came in was strong, and he thought I'd want to at least consider it before dismissing it outright. I asked him if he had a signed agreement with the listing agent. He said it was just a preliminary agreement. I asked if my name was on that agreement. There was a pause. I asked again. He said he'd handled the paperwork as a courtesy to me, given that I was in the hospital and in no position to deal with administrative details. I said I understood. I said I was tired from the ride home and needed to rest, and asked if they would both excuse me for an hour. I went to my bedroom, sat on the edge of my bed, and called my attorney. His name is Robert, and I have used him for 20 years, since he helped me with my divorce from my first husband, back when Sarah was 13. He answered on the third ring. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said he'd had cases like this before, and asked me how I was feeling physically. I said I was fine. He said good, because we had some things to do and it was better to do them quickly. I want to tell you something about that afternoon, because people who hear this story sometimes ask how I could have been so calm. The honest answer is that I wasn't calm. I was something else. I was the thing that comes after you have spent 67 years learning that anger moves loudly and accomplishes less than people expect. I had been loud exactly once in my life, in the middle of my divorce, in a courthouse hallway, and it had felt like dropping something that shattered and couldn't be picked back up. I did not want to shatter anything. I wanted my cottage back. I wanted my mother's biscuit pan that was still in the kitchen cabinet. I wanted Derek's lockbox off my front door. Robert told me to gather every ownership document I had for the property. The deed, the title insurance, the tax records. I knew exactly where they were in a fireproof lockbox in my bedroom closet, which was where they had always been. I laid them on the bed and photographed each one, while Robert stayed on the phone. He said the listing agreement Derek had signed was unenforceable because my name was not on it, and I had not authorized it. He said the offer that had come in was therefore void. He said there was also the matter of Derek having represented himself to the listing agent in a way that might constitute fraud, but that we could address that separately if I chose to pursue it. I asked what I should do first. He said I should have the lockbox removed from my door and the yard sign taken down today, and that he would contact the listing agent directly to notify them that the property was not authorized for sale and that the listing needed to be withdrawn immediately. I asked him to do that. Then I asked him about something else. About what a person does when she is 67 and has a hip that gives out on ice, and 2 children who don't call enough, and a son-in-law who looks at her cottage the way people look at something they plan to take. I asked him what a smart woman does to make sure that what's hers stays hers. Robert said that was a different conversation and a longer one, but that he had time. We talked for another 40 minutes. When I came out of the bedroom, Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table alone. Derek's truck was gone from the driveway. She looked up when I came in, and I could see she'd been crying, though she'd wiped her face. She had her hands wrapped around a coffee mug like she needed something to hold. I sat down across from her. I told her that the listing had been withdrawn and that Robert had already spoken with the agent. I told her that I was not going to pursue the fraud question because I did not want to see her husband in legal trouble, and that this was a courtesy I was extending once and would not extend again. Sarah opened her mouth, and I held up my hand, gently, the way I used to when my students started to speak, before they'd finished thinking. I told her that I loved her, that I had always loved her, that nothing about that was going to change. And then I told her some other things. I told her that I had spent the last hour on the phone with my attorney, and that I had made some decisions about my estate that I wanted her to know about directly. The cottage was going into a trust, my name only, structured so that no future claim could be made on it by a spouse or creditor without my explicit written approval. Robert had the paperwork ready, and I had a notary appointment the next morning. I told her that the secondary account at First National, the one I had added her name to 3 years ago for emergency access, was going to be restructured. Her name would come off it. This was not a punishment. This was me taking care of myself the way I should have done sooner. I told her that the guest room at this cottage was available to her, always, because she was my daughter. It was not available to Derek, not this week, and not until I had reason to believe that what happened this week would not happen again. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she said that she hadn't known he was going to do it. She said he had told her he was just making inquiries. I said I believed her. She said she should have asked more questions. I said yes. I said that was true. I said it the way I would have said it to one of my students when they were capable of better, and I needed them to know that I knew it too. I said that I also knew that the woman I raised was not a woman who would sit quietly while her mother's home was sold from underneath her, and that I was going to need to see that woman a little more clearly going forward. Sarah pressed her lips together. She nodded. We sat there for a while. The kitchen was quiet the way a lake is quiet in winter, surface still. Everything underneath moving slowly. I asked her if she wanted to stay for dinner. I said I had chicken in the freezer, and the stores were closed, but that I could make do. She said yes. She stayed. Derek came back around 8 o'clock. I was on the couch with my leg elevated and Sarah was washing dishes. He came in through the side door and stopped when he saw me. I said good evening. He said he'd been thinking and that he wanted to apologize. He said he'd overstepped. He said he had genuinely thought he was helping. I said I appreciated him saying that. He started to say something else, and I said that I was quite tired from the hospital and would need to turn in soon, but that before I did, I wanted to mention that I'd spoken with Robert today and that the listing had been withdrawn, and that if the listing agent had any questions, they should direct them to Robert directly, and I'd given them his contact information. Derek said he understood. I said I hoped so. He went to find Sarah. I heard them talking in the kitchen. Low voices, the particular register of a conversation that is trying not to be overheard. After a while, it got quieter. I looked at the fireplace. My mother had chosen the stones herself, driven to a quarry outside Asheville, and pointed to the ones she wanted. I didn't know that story until after she died, when I found a photograph in a shoebox my mother standing in a quarry yard, laughing, pointing at a pile of rocks. She was younger in it than I am now. I thought about how she never explained herself to anyone, how she made decisions quietly and completely, and then moved forward without rehearsing them for other people's approval. I thought I understood that when I was young, and then I spent a few decades forgetting it, and now here I was, getting it back. In the morning, I went to the notary. Robert met me there. We signed everything. The trust, the account restructuring, 2 letters that he would hold until needed, and that covered things I hope I never need them to cover. On the way home, I stopped at the hardware store and bought a new lock for the front door. A good one. The young man at the counter showed me 2 options and explained the difference, and I chose the better one without hesitating. I installed it myself. It took longer than it should have because of the hip, and I had to sit down twice. But I had done harder things. I stood at my front door when I was done and put the new key in the lock and turned it. It moved clean and smooth, no sticking, no hesitation. I went inside. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the lake, which was still frozen at the edges but had started to open in the middle, the way a lake does when it decides winter is finished. I have thought many times since that day about the moment when Dolores's message came through, about sitting on the edge of a hospital bed in a paper gown, reading a Zillow screenshot of my own cottage, still attached to a blood pressure monitor, about how a person could receive news like that and feel, underneath the shock and the anger, something else, something like clarity. I am 67 years old. I have a hip that healed cleaner than the surgeon expected. I have a cottage with stone my mother chose herself, and a kitchen cabinet that still has her biscuit pan in it. I have a daughter who, I believe, with some work, is going to find her way back to herself. I have an attorney who picks up on the 3rd ring. I have a new lock on my front door. Derek and Sarah moved out 2 weeks after I came home. They are renting an apartment in Raleigh now. Sarah calls on Sunday evenings. The calls are shorter than they used to be, but they are more honest, and I have learned that honest and short is worth more than long and careful. Derek has not called. Last spring, I drove up to Hendersonville on a Saturday and opened the cottage for the first time since January. I aired it out, changed the linens, swept the porch. The lake was green and full, and there were herons on the far bank, standing very still the way herons do, looking at the water with the patience of something that knows exactly what it's waiting for. I made biscuits Sunday morning. I pressed the dough the way my mother showed me, with the heel of my hand, not the knuckles. I got them right on the first try. I ate them at the kitchen table by myself with butter and a cup of coffee, looking out at the water. And I did not feel lonely even once. Some things are worth protecting, not because of what they cost or what they're worth on a market that changes by the season, but because of what's in them, what they hold, what they mean to the person who has spent a lifetime making them hers. I know that now, in a way I did not know it before January. I am grateful for the knowing, even for what it cost me to learn it. My door is locked. My name is on the deed. The water is open. That's enough? That has always been enough.